By 2011, Muammar Gaddafi had commanded Libya for over 4 decades. He had weathered attempted coups, crippling international sanctions, and devastating wars. Yet in the final months of his existence, everything crumbled. Libya exploded into chaos. Cities transformed into hellish battlegrounds. And for Gaddafi, destiny arrived not in the splendor of a palace or the dignity of a courtroom, but sprawled on scorched earth, battered and cornered. Muammar Muhammad Abu Manyar al-Gaddafi emerged into this world in 1942 within a desolate desert camp near Sirte, Libya. Born into crushing poverty among the nomadic Bedouin tribes, he clawed his way through military ranks and pursued education in Libya before venturing to the United Kingdom. In 1969, at merely 27 years old, he orchestrated a swift, bloodless revolution against King Idris and seized absolute control of the nation. From that pivotal moment, Gaddafi ruled Libya with an iron fist. He dismantled the monarchy, expelled American and British military forces, and commandeered the oil industry. He fabricated his own political doctrine called the Jamahiriya, which he proclaimed delivered power to the masses. Yet in truth, he hoarded every fragment of authority for himself. Throughout the turbulent 1970s and 1980s, Gaddafi earned worldwide notoriety for his extremist ideologies and patronage of armed revolutionary movements across continents. He bore responsibility for heinous terrorist attacks, including the catastrophic 1988 destruction of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, which slaughtered 270 innocent souls. Consequently, Libya endured crushing international sanctions for years. Nevertheless, Gaddafi also fashioned himself as a champion of Pan-African and Pan-Arab unity. He relentlessly advocated for continental solidarity and demanded recognition as a formidable voice against Western imperialism. By the dawn of the 2000s, he had begun rehabilitating his international image. He abandoned weapons programs, restored diplomatic relations with Western powers, and attempted to revitalize Libya's stagnant economy. Yet within Libya's borders, widespread fury simmered. Citizens suffered under suffocating authoritarian control. Political opposition was obliterated. Freedom of expression vanished entirely. Corruption poisoned every institution. Oil wealth remained concentrated among the privileged elite. Gaddafi and his dynasty basked in opulent luxury, while countless Libyans endured grinding poverty. When protests erupted in February 2011, the massive participation surprised no one. In Benghazi, Libya's second-largest metropolis, unrest ignited immediately following similar revolutionary uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt that had toppled their respective regimes. This sweeping wave of resistance across the region became immortalized as the Arab Spring. In Libya, revolution commenced on February 15th, when desperate families of political prisoners assembled outside a police station demanding the liberation of human rights attorney Fathi Turbil. Authorities had arrested him earlier that day for condemning the horrific 1996 Abu Salam prison massacre, where Gaddafi's security apparatus had systematically executed over 1,200 inmates. The demonstration rapidly gained unstoppable momentum. By February 17th, forever remembered as the Day of Rage, thousands of Libyans flooded the streets of Benghazi, Beta, Tobruk, and Derna. They expressed decades of accumulated rage against tyranny, destitution, and brutal oppression. Rather than permitting peaceful demonstrations, security forces, including the dreaded Internal Security Agency and revolutionary committees, unleashed lethal violence. Hospital reports confirmed that over 230 civilians perished within 4 catastrophic days. Most victims suffered fatal gunshot wounds to the chest and head, proving the deliberate use of live ammunition against defenseless crowds. Instead of restoring order, Gaddafi's regime deployed additional troops and positioned snipers to massacre protesters from rooftops. State propaganda blamed the uprising on foreign infiltrators and drugged youth. Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, appeared on television threatening civil war and promising that rivers of blood would cascade if protests continued. The savage crackdown only intensified resistance. By February's end, crucial military units began defecting. In Benghazi, army elements refused to slaughter civilians. The 36th Brigade, commanded by Major General Suleiman Mahmoud, abandoned the regime and assisted rebels in capturing the city. Multiple government buildings were incinerated. Police stations were overrun. Weapons arsenals were seized. By February 24th, most of eastern Libya had slipped beyond Gaddafi's grasp. Cities like Tobruk, Misrata, Beta, and Zawiya witnessed ferocious clashes. Protesters armed themselves with rifles, plundered from military bases. Several of Gaddafi's Air Force pilots refused to bomb cities and instead fled their aircraft to Malta, seeking sanctuary. The opposition swiftly organized into a provisional leadership known as the National Transitional Council, formally established on February 27th in Benghazi. Led by former Justice Minister Mustafa Abdul Jalil, the NTC claimed to represent the revolutionary forces and began architecting a new Libya without Gaddafi. Meanwhile, Gaddafi maintained his stranglehold on Tripoli and surrounding western territories. His forces included elite units like the Qamis Brigade, commanded by his son Qamis Gaddafi, which possessed tanks and heavy artillery. The regime also recruited foreign mercenaries from Chad, Mali, and Niger to crush dissent. By early March 2011, the situation had reached a catastrophic crescendo. Gaddafi's forces were deploying devastating heavy weapons, tanks, and air power to recapture rebel-controlled cities. Civilians faced relentless bombardment, particularly in eastern strongholds like Benghazi and Aidabia. International media broadcast horrific images of residential neighborhoods reduced to rubble by artillery shells. Terror mounted that Gaddafi would orchestrate a massacre upon reaching Benghazi. On March 12th, the Arab League convened an emergency session and demanded a no-fly zone over Libya. This proved crucial as it provided regional legitimacy for potential foreign intervention. That same week, France and the United Kingdom pressured the United Nations to act decisively. On March 17, 2011, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, with 10 nations supporting and 5 abstaining, including Russia and China. The resolution authorized the deployment of all necessary measures to protect civilians, including establishing a no-fly zone. It also prohibited all flights in Libyan airspace that could serve military purposes and demanded an immediate ceasefire. Merely 2 days later, on March 19th, airstrikes commenced. The operation was initially spearheaded by a coalition including the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Italy. The first missiles obliterated Gaddafi's air defense systems, radar installations, and military communication hubs. Over 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from American and British warships patrolling the Mediterranean. French fighter jets simultaneously destroyed tanks advancing toward Benghazi. The coalition's military campaign was designated Operation Odyssey Dawn. Its mission was to prevent Gaddafi from attacking civilians, especially in areas where rebels were resisting. On March 23rd, NATO assumed complete command of all military operations under the new designation Operation Unified Protector. The alliance encompassed 28 NATO members and non-NATO partners, including Qatar, the UAE, and Jordan. The air campaign rapidly obliterated a substantial portion of Gaddafi's military infrastructure. His MiG-23 fighter jets, Sukhoi bombers, and military air bases were pulverized. NATO also targeted long-range rocket launchers, supply convoys, and command centers. Within the first 2 weeks, dozens of tanks and armored vehicles were annihilated, especially near Misrata and Zintan. At sea, NATO enforced a stringent arms embargo and intercepted weapons shipments bound for Gaddafi's forces. NATO warships patrolled Libya's coastline and intercepted vessels suspected of transporting military supplies. Despite the devastating damage to his military apparatus, Gaddafi remained defiant. He continued addressing the public through state television, accusing NATO of attempting to colonize Libya. He branded the rebels rats and traitors, vowing to purge the country street by street. With NATO continuously targeting Gaddafi's supply routes, weapons depots, and command centers, his military forces were stretched dangerously thin. Rebel groups from the Western Mountains, the Misrata Front, and eastern Libya began converging on the capital from multiple directions. On August 20, 2011, the rebels launched Operation Mermaid Dawn, their final assault on Tripoli. It was a meticulously coordinated strategy that included fighters who had been clandestinely infiltrated into the city earlier. These local fighters rose up from within the capital, while armed convoys advanced from the exterior. Over the subsequent 5 days, brutal clashes erupted throughout the city. The neighborhoods of Tazura, Fashloum, and Souk al-Juma witnessed savage fighting. Loyalist forces attempted to maintain their positions using snipers and tanks, but they were overwhelmed by the lightning speed of the rebel advance. Many Gaddafi soldiers either surrendered or abandoned their posts. This fortress had served as the epicenter of his rule for over 4 decades. It was reinforced with concrete barriers, bunkers, and subterranean tunnels. Inside the compound, rebels discovered luxury possessions, weapons caches, classified documents, and evidence that Gaddafi had fled hastily. But the man himself had vanished. By the time Tripoli was collapsing, Gaddafi had already escaped. Intelligence reports suggested he had evacuated the city before the final assault began, likely around August 19th or 20th. He was believed to be moving between various safe houses with assistance from loyal tribal networks. His family was also fleeing. On August 29th, his wife Safia Farkash, daughter Aisha, and sons Hannibal and Mohammed crossed the border into Algeria, where they received temporary asylum. Another son, Sadi Gaddafi, later fled to Niger, where he was detained by authorities. However, Gaddafi himself chose not to abandon Libya. He believed that forsaking the country would constitute complete defeat. Instead, he decided to hide in areas still controlled by loyalist tribes, particularly around his birthplace, Sirte, located along the Mediterranean coastline, approximately 450 kilometers from Tripoli and 570 kilometers from Benghazi. Sirte held profound personal significance for him. It wasn't merely his hometown. It was a city he had constructed during his reign with modern architecture, expansive boulevards, and government complexes. He had even hosted African Union summits there and once proclaimed Sirte should become the capital of a United States of Africa. Gaddafi reached Sirte in early September 2011, accompanied by a dwindling number of loyalists. Most were trusted advisors, bodyguards, and fighters from the Gaddafi tribe, his own tribal lineage, which wielded considerable influence in the region. 2 of his sons, Muammar Gaddafi, a military commander, and Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, his political successor, were also believed to be moving between hideouts in and around the city. With Tripoli lost, Sirte became Gaddafi's final sanctuary. He was isolated from the remainder of the country. Communications were severely limited. Supplies were rapidly depleting. Yet he remained unwilling to flee Libya or surrender. By the second week of September, forces from the National Transitional Council began encircling Sirte. The NTC, now recognized by numerous countries as Libya's legitimate government, had dispatched thousands of fighters from different brigades to capture the city. Units from Misrata, Benghazi, and Zintan approached from the east and west. Their objective was to apprehend Gaddafi and establish complete control over the nation. The rebels anticipated a swift victory, but Sirte proved formidable. Loyalist fighters, including snipers and artillery units, had established defensive positions throughout the city. They utilized civilian structures like residences, schools, and hospitals for cover. The streets were riddled with booby traps. Landmines and improvised explosive devices were planted along major thoroughfares. Beginning in mid-September, the NTC commenced intensive bombardment of the city. Grad rockets, mortar, and tank fire struck buildings daily. NATO aircraft also bombed strategic targets, including bunkers and command centers. Civilians attempted to flee, but many remained trapped inside. The city's infrastructure began collapsing. Inside Sirte, Gaddafi and his entourage kept relocating between abandoned homes and underground bunkers to evade detection. He no longer maintained a coherent command structure. Loyalist morale was deteriorating, but Gaddafi continued issuing orders to resist. His son Mu'tasim remained responsible for the city's defenses and coordinated the final efforts to repel the advancing forces. By late September, Sirte was completely surrounded. The NTC controlled the periphery and began a methodical block-by-block advance. Sniper fire and street battles made progress agonizingly slow and deadly. Hundreds of fighters perished on both sides. NATO aircraft circled overhead constantly, searching for any traces of Gaddafi's whereabouts. Drones and surveillance jets tracked heat signatures and radio signals. Consequently, Gaddafi ordered his group to avoid using phones, radios, or any electronic equipment. Their few satellite phones were rarely activated, and they mostly relied on human messengers, or runners, who moved through the city on foot to deliver messages between hideouts. Electricity and water supplies were severed. The group survived on canned goods, dry rations, and whatever could be scavenged from damaged stores or brought by loyal civilians remaining in the city. Medical supplies were non-existent. Wounded fighters were treated with primitive tools, and antibiotics were critically scarce. Gaddafi's group also suffered from hunger, dehydration, and illness due to appalling conditions. By this time, approximately 200 fighters still remained loyal to him. Most belonged to his own tribe and originated from Sirte or neighboring towns. These men guarded Gaddafi vigilantly and formed a small convoy around him whenever they relocated. Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, Libya's longtime defense minister, was also among them. These men constituted the remnants of his inner circle. Eyewitnesses and subsequent reports confirmed that Gaddafi's health had begun deteriorating. He had lost substantial weight, appeared pale and exhausted, and was no longer the commanding, confident figure seen on Libyan television. His beard had grown longer and whiter. He reportedly suffered from high blood pressure, mild diabetes, and stress-related ailments. Despite everything, he remained steadfast in his refusal to surrender or leave Libya unless forced. He also maintained complete silence to the outside world. After Tripoli fell, Gaddafi ceased broadcasting public messages. Unlike earlier in the war, when he appeared regularly on state television, he now avoided cameras entirely. He feared that any leak of his location would result in a NATO airstrike. His silence was strategic. He wanted people to believe he might already be dead or elsewhere. Nevertheless, he harbored a plan. His goal was to break through the siege of Sirte and flee southward, possibly towards Sabah, a city in the central desert, or even across the border into Niger, where other members of his government had already escaped. However, every escape route was blocked by rebel forces. Roads were under surveillance. Convoys attempting to leave the city were either attacked or forced to retreat. With no way out and no safe refuge, Gaddafi's group became increasingly desperate. They began sleeping in shifts. Some fighters maintained watch, while others rested. They used sandbags and debris to shield building entrances and conceal vehicles from drone surveillance. Still, their movement was severely restricted, and the constant bombing made survival more difficult each day. By mid-October, it was evident that Gaddafi could not hold out in Sirte much longer. On October 19th, Gaddafi made the fateful decision to attempt escape. He and his remaining inner circle began preparing to depart that night. The plan was to form a convoy of more than 50 vehicles, mostly pickup trucks and SUVs. Many were equipped with mounted machine guns or anti-aircraft weapons. Some carried weapons and ammunition, while others were filled with guards and Gaddafi's personal staff. Among those in the convoy were Muammar Gaddafi, Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, Mansour Dao, Gaddafi's chief of security, and several senior military officers. A few family members were also present. The escape plan was extraordinarily risky. To avoid detection, the convoy planned to depart under cover of darkness. Around 8 p.m. on October 19th, they began moving out from a concealed location in the city. The vehicles traveled without headlights, attempting to remain hidden between buildings and under trees. They hoped the darkness would shield them from aerial surveillance. Their objective was to reach Sirte's outskirts, then follow a desert route southwest toward Wadi Zamzam, and from there toward Sabah, where they would attempt to cross into Niger or Algeria. However, unknown to them, NATO surveillance drones had been monitoring Sirte continuously for weeks. American and French intelligence had been tracking unusual movements in the area, searching for signs that Gaddafi might attempt to flee. That same night, a US MQ-1 Predator drone, flying above Sirte, detected heat signatures showing a convoy forming and departing the city. In the early morning hours of October 20th, as the convoy reached Sirte's western outskirts, it was spotted again, this time more clearly. Around 8:30 a.m., NATO executed its final strike. A U.S. Predator drone, controlled from outside Libya, launched a Hellfire missile directly at the convoy. The missile struck one of the lead vehicles as it moved slowly along Sirte's western edge. That strike immediately halted the convoy's front. Minutes later, French Mirage fighter jets, soaring over the area, dropped laser-guided bombs on the convoy's rear. Multiple vehicles exploded in flames. The attack hit both ends of the convoy, trapping those in the middle and sending the survivors into panic. Gaddafi's security guards and fighters attempted to respond, but they were outgunned and exposed. Some vehicles were destroyed instantly. Others flipped or crashed as drivers tried to escape the airstrikes. Dozens of loyalist fighters died immediately. Many survivors leaped out and ran toward nearby unfinished buildings, open lots, and a large concrete drainage pipe beneath the road. Gaddafi, Muammar, Mansour Dao, and a small number of others survived the airstrikes and fled on foot. Covered in dust and blood, they slipped into the large circular drainage pipe. The pipe was located just off the road, concealed by brush and debris. It measured approximately 4 feet in diameter, just large enough for a man to crawl through. Inside, the group waited in silence, hoping to avoid discovery. By that time, rebel fighters from Misrata had already moved into the area. They had been following the convoy's path for days and arrived shortly after the airstrike. The rebels were armed with rifles, grenades, and light machine guns. They began searching the area methodically, checking damaged vehicles, nearby buildings, and the surrounding terrain. It didn't take long before they noticed bloodstains and footprints near the road. A few followed the trail and spotted the drain entrance. They threw in a grenade first, expecting more guards to be hiding inside. Then they moved closer to inspect. That's when they discovered Gaddafi crouched inside. He was wearing brown pants, a blood-stained shirt, and a flak vest. His hair was matted, and his face was covered in blood and dirt. He had injuries to his left arm, back, and right leg, most likely from the blast and debris during the airstrike. They dragged him out into the harsh sunlight. He stumbled, barely able to walk. Muammar Gaddafi, also wounded but still standing, was captured moments later, along with Abu Bakr Yunus Chaber, who was seriously injured. A few others tried to flee from the surrounding area, but they were either shot or captured immediately. Mansour Dao was among those taken alive. He later confirmed that the group had been attempting to escape to Sabah when the airstrike hit. The rebels dragged Gaddafi to a nearby road. They forced him down and placed him in the back of a pickup truck. By now, more and more fighters had gathered. News of Gaddafi's capture had spread rapidly over radios and phones, and many rushed to the scene. As the truck moved slowly, people began striking him with sticks, fists, and gun butts. Some pulled his hair and yanked at his clothes. Others shouted insults, many referencing the years of dictatorship, torture, and bombings Libyans had endured under his rule. Several fighters climbed into the truck's back to get closer to him. There was little control over the situation. Multiple videos, later shared across the world, showed Gaddafi slumped over, bleeding heavily from the head and midsection. At some point, he tried to sit up, but was forced back down. The violence continued for several minutes as the truck tried to navigate through the narrow roads, packed with armed fighters. The exact moment of his death remains unclear. According to medical reports, he had been shot in the head and abdomen. Some claim he was shot during a struggle in the truck. Others believe a fighter may have pulled the trigger deliberately. There was no official trial, no announcement of a formal execution, and no confirmation of who fired the fatal shot. What is certain is that by the time the truck left Sirte outskirts and reached an NTP-controlled checkpoint, Muammar Gaddafi was dead. His body was covered in blood, his shirt torn, and his pants soaked. He had multiple gunshot wounds and bruises across his body. The doctors who later examined him confirmed that he died around 1 p.m. on October 20, 2011, at the age of 69.